Hello and welcome to my TI-84 calculator crash course. Let's begin. So why is this important? The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics states that every high schooler should develop fluency in operations with real numbers, vectors, and matrices, using mental computation or pencil and paper calculations for simple cases and technology for more complicated cases. But what does this mean for us? I like to relate this to calculator fluency and effective use. And what this means is just how well we use our calculators and how comfortable we are with using them. You may laugh, but I have seen so many instances of high school students doing 7 plus 3 or 4 times 1 in their calculators. But the thing is, the more that we use our calculators effectively, the more we're able to realize when we need them and when we don't. And this makes us more efficient, which makes us faster. And I know that everyone's goal is to get through their math homework as quickly as possible. But also, this helps us to get through tests quicker. Because remember, if we're on a test and we need our calculator for it, I guarantee you the last thing that you want to do on that test is eat up your valuable time trying to figure out how to use the calculator. So the quicker we get at it now and the more fluent we become in using our calculator means that on high stakes tests or during our homework, we'll be much more comfortable and much more quicker. I'm also going to leave this PowerPoint up as a resource throughout the year so that you can access all the different tips and tricks that I show you throughout, just in case you forget and you want to use this as a reference. So let me pull up my calculator here. There it is. Let's exit out of that. All right, so this is our calculator. This second button right here, this blue one, relates to all the blue things that we see above the buttons. So like, for example, if I wanted to do the square root of a number, I'm going to press this second button. You know it's working because you get the arrow on that screen. And then I'm going to press the x squared button because the square root sign is right above it. We're going to plug in, let's say, the number 7, enter, and there we go. All right, and the alpha button works very similar except for the green letters that we see above all the buttons. We'll talk about a use for the alpha button a little bit later. So if we wanted to do 7 squared, that's pretty easy. We just do 7 and then the x squared button because that's an exponent, and there we go. But if we wanted to do an exponent greater than 2, we need to go over to this caret button over here. All right, so we put the caret button and then let's say 3. So we want to do 7 cubed. And so that's how we do with exponents that are greater than 2. All right, now what happens if, let's say, I have the square root, let's bring the square root of 7 back. And now let's say I want to use that number. Well, I have a couple options. I could type in 2.645751311, or what I can do is I can press second and then this negative sign, which brings us this answer. And this stands for what the answer was from the problem right before it. So now I can say answer plus 3. And as you can see, it added 3 to that right there. So instead of retyping out that whole number, I was able to do that as a shortcut. Similarly, another shortcut, if we're typing a number and, oh, I meant to type in a different number here. I didn't mean to type in the 3. Well, we could press clear and then retype the whole thing. Or we can delete that and put the number that we meant right after it. And then right above we see insert, so now let's figure out how to use that. Let's say we were supposed to put a 7 in between this 9 and the 6. So we'll press second, delete, so that we get that insert thing. And we'll put in the 7 right there. All right, so all these are just different shortcuts that are good for us to get used to and to get comfortable with so we don't spend time retyping things that we don't need to. All right, let's clear that all away and move on to our next topic, which is error messages. So here's an example of an error message. That's what it looks like. So we have 2 options. We can just press quit, which is just the enter, and then we can move on and retype whatever we wanted to. But maybe you don't know what your error was, or maybe you don't want to retype everything because you want to still use that same line. You just want to fix your error and move on. Well, you can move your cursor down to go to and then press enter. And that will show you, that will put the cursor exactly where the error occurred, and you'll know what to fix. And there we go, now we have a valid entry. So let's say you were typing something and you had and it came up as a valid entry, but then you look and you realize you really made a mistake in what you put in. Well, I could retype what I wanted to, or another shortcut we can do, second button, and press enter, and then that'll give you the line right above. So just like how second and then the negative sign gave us the answer, second enter gives us the input. And now we can change that into what we actually wanted it to say, whatever that was. All right, let's clear that. And now we can move on to our next topic, which is graphing. My calculator back up. So all of our graphing is going to be in this area right here. So let's put in an equation. I already have one in there, so let's get rid of that. Let's say we wanted to put in 3x plus 2. Well, then we can just jump over to graph. And there it is. Let's say maybe we wanted to change the window. Let's say maybe we wanted to get a closer y-axis view. We go into window, and we will jump down to where the y starts. Let's say maybe we wanted -5 to 5 instead. And maybe instead of each dash being 1, we wanted it to be 0.5. Well, then we go back to graph. And see our graph, even though we didn't change the y equals, even though we didn't change the graph, it looks a little bit different because all of these marks, instead of them being 1, like they were before, are now 0.5. And so we're a lot more zoomed in on the origin of the graph. All right, so that's how we use our window and our y equals. This trace function is very useful because it allows us to see all the values on the line, and we can move this around to find things that we want. But if we do second trace, we get to the calculate section. And you're going to be using this a lot, so definitely pay attention to this and play around with this when you have time. So if I wanted to find the 0, remember that's when the line crosses the x-axis. I'll move my cursor down to where it's highlighting the number 2, because that's where 0 is. I press enter. And so what it wants us to do is get a left bound and a right bound. So we want to go beneath where it crosses the x-axis, so that's beneath. And then it wants us to go above, that's above, and then we just press enter one more time, and then it'll give us that value. All right, so it's going to be very useful for us later on. All right, let's move on to what we have next, which is the math button. This is one of the most useful things that we will use, as well as the graphing capabilities that this calculator has. So let's say you had 4.89, and you wanted to know what that was in a fraction. We could mess around with numbers, or we can just go to math, and then see how the 1 is highlighting on the fraction. So we press enter, and that'll put it into a fraction for us, and that will also be the lowest, most reduced form of that fraction. All right, and similarly, we could do the same thing if we wanted to go to decimal. We'll just type in a fraction and then go down to decimal and press enter just like we did for fraction. Although, and we also have the option of like how we had to do higher exponents using the caret. If we wanted to do something instead of a square root, like maybe a higher one, we could do a cube root right there, or maybe we wanted to go even higher. So we press that. Let's say we wanted to do the 4th root of something, and then press over, and now we're inside. So we can do the 4th root of 96, for example, and that'll give us the answer there. So that's a way to have roots higher than just a square root. Another very helpful thing is log. Now this log gives us log base 10, but we're not always going to be using log base 10. So if we go to the bottom of this math list, we get log base. So press enter, and then you can put in a log base of whatever you need, maybe 3. So log base 3 of 8. And now we're able to calculate logs even if they're not base 10 with very, very easy methods. All right, if we're going to jump back into that math section again, another helpful thing that I think was a very common use is this absolute value. So that's in the numbers section, that first one. So you put absolute value, it even looks like an absolute value, -3, enter, and there you go. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out is in this probability section, all the way over here. So that's where you get permutations combinations, and also factorials. We're not going to use that a ton, but they're good to know where they are in case you will need them in the future, and I know that you will. All right, so let's move on. Trigonometry. Most of this is fairly self-explanatory. You have, of course, all of your sine, cosine, and tangent values here, and then if you needed the inverse of any of them, just second sine, and that gives you the inverse sine as we see right here. So let's just try one out. Sine of 7 gives us that value right there. But the one thing that is the most important for this is checking the mode, whether it is in degrees or radians, because that will drastically change your answer. So how we check is we go to mode, and you see it says radian or degree right here. So we'll just press that down. And if we want it in radians, it is right now because that's black highlighted. Maybe we want it in degrees though. So we'll move it over, press enter. And now you're in degrees. Did you see that switch? Great. Now you can quit that by doing second mode. And now let's try sine of 7 again. And there you go. See how it changed? It's very different answers. So always make sure when you're using the trig functions here that you're checking whether you want radians or degrees. You'll know based on the problems once we get to trigonometry problems, but never fail to check that because it's such a mistake because you know what you're doing and it's not worth getting the points off for it. So this is what I was talking about earlier about this alpha button. One of the most useful alpha functions that I can think is in storing. So for example, what I mean is you see all these like A, B, C, right? They can act as variables very easily. Let's say we wanted to take 5. If we hit this STO, that means store. Now we're going to put on alpha A. All right? So what that means is that A is now equal to 5. And I say, this says right here, always check to make sure it's stored before you're using it. So just put in alpha A, press enter, see, A equals 5. And now we can use that times alpha A, and gets 25, 5 times 5, right? And so this is very helpful if maybe you had something that was a very, very, very long number. What if it was like 8899 and then you had a decimal? All right, instead of retyping this number out all the time, if you're going to be using it, you can store that as whatever letter you want. And now, instead of retyping out that number, all you have to do is alpha B, and your number is there. Again, just helping us to grow in fluency and speed and efficiency. Thank you guys for paying attention. These are some resources. This is the online calculator that I was using right here. You can get it for a 90-day trial. So I recommend doing that if you happen to lose your calculator or you're in a situation where you need it and you don't have it. This is something that I'm putting in the parent letter for your parents to look at when they have time. This is, again, the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics. It's their position on using technology in the classroom. And so it's just something that I put in the parent letter. And then this as well, it's a guidebook for how to use the TI-84 calculators. They also have all the other ones, but since this PowerPoint was focused on specifically the TI-84, I included that guidebook in here. When you're using this, it's very overwhelming because it's over 400 pages. Most of the things that you guys will need to find in there are in the first chapter. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to search through 400 pages of information. It's really just that first one. Thank you for listening and paying attention. As I said, this will be up and available for you whenever you need it. Thank you, and I look forward to see what this year has in store for us.